I saw that we were giving up a significant portion of our income to Uncle Sam. That pink slip was essentially the door that opened a ton of other opportunities. How can I get a better grade in this class? The lessons they were learning.
Welcome back, investor. We've got another episode of Passive Income Adventures with Alina Trigub here from New Jersey. Say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, this is going to be a good one. Alina's been in the alternative investing, real estate investing space for quite a while with a lot of different backgrounds of bringing capital and projects together. The dating game where if you got a project needs money, people like us will find the investors to back it. And Alina, we've seen a lot of renditions of this through different market cycles when things are going well, when things are not going well, and with different structures. So I'm really looking forward to getting your insight on capital raising in general, what investors need to know before they're putting money in, and the different ways that they can invest money in a deal. There are lots of different structures we can do this in. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Absolutely, and happy to help. Having been on both sides, GP and LP, I see it and have the perspective as a passive investor and as an active investor. And that helps me to review the deals and share the deals, or that's how I shared the deals in the past, rather when I was presenting it to passive investors.
Yeah, I find that to be really important that we are investor centric because we've actually done the thing on maybe the manager side and the passive side. I know that being a passive investor has made me a much better deal sponsor because you can really relate. So I think powerful experience. And I also like your story from the sense that you have seen passive income. You've been around it for a while as part of your career. And the point of the show is to really peel back basically the farce and the scam of passive income and show people what it really is and what it isn't. How do we actually generate passive income? What does that term even mean? And can we actually build a lifestyle where we can become work optional with money that we didn't earn running our own business? So all of those insights and how people build wealth, your book, where it's your legacy on Main Street, talking about different kinds of investing for public markets on Wall Street and private markets for like your buddy's startup or doing a real estate syndication. So get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself, your past, your history. Like, what were the turning points that you saw in your life that kind of led you down this path?
For me, it was pretty easy. I'm a former tax accountant, and even though I haven't practiced accounting for about 2 decades at this point, taxes have always been on my mind. And with that in mind, when I was still a corporate employee, I saw how, along with the income, the tax brackets were increasing for my husband and me. And that bothered me because I saw that we were giving up a significant portion of our income to Uncle Sam. So I was always on the lookout for a way to lower tax implications, right, officially and legally, of course. And in my search, in my journey, real estate kept coming up. So I just essentially took a leap. And initially, I wanted to buy small multifamilies. But when I realized that properties in New Jersey did not underwrite the way I wanted them to underwrite, I started looking out of state. And that's how I came across the world of private equities and syndications, and essentially took a leap and started investing. So my journey started as a passive investor, but 8, 9 years ago at this point. And from that point on, it escalated. First, I started investing in multifamily, then mobile home parks, then storage. And then I looked beyond real estate into other things. And then I started doing things actively, became more active in and started building my real estate business while still having W-2 job and raising kids. And eventually, in my case, luckily I got a pink slip when pandemic started, but my only regret about that is that I didn't get that pink slip any sooner. When you have a cushy W-2 job, it's really hard to give that up with all the perks and 401k and everything that you get. That pink slip was essentially the door that opened a ton of other opportunities for me. And at this point, I'm excited. I'm very happy that happened. I'm a completely different person. And a lot of the transformation is attributed to, of course, a lot of hard work. When people ask me how much I work around my personal and my family schedule. And a lot of it is attributed to continuous personal development. I would not be where I'm at today without continuously working on myself and working on going from fixed mindset to a growth mindset, and always taking a different stand and even changing the way, not the way I talk only, but also the way I think about things, and teaching my kids to think differently and approach situations differently. Instead of saying, I cannot get an A in this class, what about how can I get a better grade in this class? What can I do to improve my grade? Instead of saying, I can absolutely not understand what the professor is talking about. So that's pretty much how I approach things now. And not to say that everything always works out, but if you have the grit, if you have the desire to succeed in anything, by putting efforts and working towards your goal, you can certainly achieve all your goals by having them in front of you and taking even baby steps towards these goals.
The path that you've taken actually I find to be interesting because you're talking about how you got into real estate investing. Were you a limited partner at first, or were you buying your own stuff, or were you just like going into syndications as purely passive LP?
First, I was LP, purely passively investing, and gradually I realized that this was something that I was more interested about. I gained knowledge through talking to people, reading books, attending events, and learning more that way. And then later, I realized that that knowledge combined with my education and past experience as a tax accountant, plus my two business degrees, or one is in accounting and then MBA in finance, put me in a position where I can start my own business and help other people follow in my footsteps. And that's what I did by starting Sama Financial years ago, working through that, initial raising capital, and then later turning that company into an educational company where we provide passive investor education to our club members, and later translating all that knowledge into the book that now published, that you mentioned, Your Legacy on Main Street, and you see it in my background. That red book is the book that I published. That took a couple of years, but I finally made it happen. Essentially, all the knowledge that I learned from my own experience and my client, again, coupled with the education that I received, is in that book. Not only how to start passively investing, but also where to tap for sources of capital. What kind of tax advantages can you have? Or if you want to take a step back, one of the early chapters talk about the 7 steps of financial well-being, where I'm saying before you even start investing, let's take a step back and understand where you stand. Are your finances in order? Have you paid all your debts? Do you have emergency fund in place, and so forth? So I talk about different aspects of life, all of them impacting and leading towards that step where you're actually at the point where you become a credited investor and you're eligible to invest, and you start investing while you're learning. And the more you learn, the more you try and understand and ask questions, the better you become. And then eventually this investing in syndications becomes purely passive.
Exactly, and having that LP experience and then realizing sometimes we have people who come into my investing club. This is a free club. People get together, we talk about deals, joint venture type of stuff, and they want to be general partners or joint venture partners. And so we'll put a deal together and they'll come in, they'll put in a little bit of their own money. They might raise some money into the top level syndication. We'll come in and basically help run things a little bit, and they'll get done and they'll be like, and I hated that. I would rather just be a limited partner. This is a lot more work than I thought, but they learned a lot through the process and it makes them better limited partners. And so they're coming at it opposite of what you did. But at the same time, I see people who come in as limited partners who just catch the vision. I actually would love to explore this more and maybe even think about it as a career change, but it's important to discuss it's a career change. It's not
It's
a side hustle or something we can dabble with. It really takes a full time commitment. So, talk us through your transition, not just from your accounting business to basically getting laid off during the pandemic, but also your transition from passive real estate investor to doing this more as a career.
Sure. So I left the accounting field actually ages ago when I realized I didn't really care much for accounting. And I went into the information technology world where I spent 20 years and had a pretty successful career. And during that time, I had different roles and I changed roles a lot. But the main objective of most of my roles was essentially to connect the two worlds, the world of business and the world of technology. They don't always communicate well because they don't speak the same language. And I was that missing link, if you will. I was connecting them, I was helping them, I was translating the business requirements into the technical requirements and helping developers understand what is it that they needed to do, how they can code the application so that it would work correctly. And we're talking pre-AI world where you actually needed developers to develop the application. But what I realized when I started raising money is that I have a lot of transferable skills. Because I was able to connect those two worlds, business and technology, I took those skills and transferred them to the world of syndications, where I was now connecting investors with investments. It was very similar. And because I was already an LP myself in numerous syndications, I knew the process from the investor standpoint. I understood it. I knew the sentiment. I knew what questions I was asking, and I do and enjoy asking a lot of questions. It was relatively easy for me to translate all of that and start raising. And then eventually, at some point after I became an entrepreneur and was on my own, a friend of mine connected me with a fund manager. He just said, "You guys should talk." And that turned almost instantaneously, because we hit it off, into a brand new venture. I became the head of investor relations at the private equity company. And before the fund manager almost immediately invited me in. And I had to warn him. I said, "You realize that I am a former accountant turned into IT person. I don't exactly have that head of investor relations experience. So yeah, it's all fine." And he turned out to be very right, because I was very successful at that with the candidate. Of course, this was during the great years when the real estate was going up. We're talking 20, 21, 22. We had a phenomenal time. So yes, it was much, much easier to raise capital at the time. Nevertheless, given the times, you still need to be able to approach investors from the right standpoint, and you still need to be able to be well versed in the investments, be able to explain it, and you still need to have a decent conversation and be able to answer investor questions to be able to raise money. So yes, it was easy, but you had to be prepared at the time. And I think I was, because I did really, really until the point that I realized I wanted to work on my own, and it was good working with other people. The team was absolutely phenomenal. I very much enjoyed it, but I always wanted to do my own thing. So that's how I transitioned into purely becoming educator. And then I dabbled into private lending and did a little bit of other things, spent time on the books and my recent TED talk, which is not directly on investing, but it's more about wealth building. The TEDx that I did in Billings, Montana, was how to empower parents to teach their kids financial literacy at home from grade school on, with a caveat that we as parents, and you can relate, you as a parent of 6 kids, you can relate that we should not be relying solely on schools to teach kids financial literacy. We as parents need to take matters into our own hands and engage with kids from the early age and teach them not just financial literacy, but the street stuff. Because when kids are done with school and go to college, they're essentially going there on their own. And I find that a lot of kids are not prepared. And I did not want my kids to be not prepared based on the stuff that they were learning in school. And that's why my husband and I took the matters into our own hands and started teaching them. So my TEDx is also based on my own family's experience, and then some of the examples intertwined in the talk. But the gist of it is, you don't have to have a degree. Talk about your experiences, talk about your mistakes. It's better for the kids to learn from your mistakes than from someone else's mistakes. And that, of course, by teaching kids financial literacy, lead them to hopefully take the path to becoming financially independent early on, and not wait and not spend 20, 30 years in their corporate career until they think about that independently.
Yeah, it's definitely a different world. I was telling my kids are in their early 20s and they're like, oh, the boomers ruined everything type of kids. I said, let's just back up here. Like when I was growing up, my dad had a pension. And I growing up, we're like, we don't have a pension. We have to go to college and invest in our retirement accounts. And that was a new thing for our generation. But my dad, the generation before, like his dad had a farm. And my dad was like, I'm never going to be able to afford a farm. All the wealth is in the farm. And he bought this crappy little house on a little neighborhood lot, like one of those World War II bungalow kind of thing. And I don't think he realized, because at the time the house was cheap. And he did not realize eventually what assets those homes would become. And so things are just shifting. They just shift every generation. And I don't think my kids really understand that, yeah, the way that boomers or Xers did things are not going to be the way that you guys do things. You're going to have to figure out a new way. And so you mentioned raising capital during the bubble years versus the lean years. And this is the same thing we're talking about with our kids. It's like you had to change because what was working then is no longer working. And then just teaching your kids that resilience and that ability. What would you say before where you had a skill set that you were able to transfer? That's a very common theme on the show. People who are good at transferring skill sets can adapt and be able to move on. So tell me about the changes that you've seen in the capital raising landscape since the bubble kind of burst in, what was that, March 21 when everything started coming rolled?
Yeah, I would say so.
Just,
22,
yes. Whenever the interest rates went up, it was
the 22 was still relatively okay, and with that fine, I was still at the private equity at
mhm,
that time. But as if I was looking forward, I just decided this is it. I don't want to do it anymore. I want it to be on my own. So I stopped raising capital, but I kept in touch with a lot of managers, fund managers, and capital raisers, and I know how difficult 2023 and 24 have been for the folks to raise for a number of reasons. Our economy was shifting and not exactly the direction we wanted to shift. Inflation was on the rise. The jobs were scarce, and people that are in the middle of their career were facing tough choices because as they were laid off, it was harder and harder for them to find jobs. And even when they were finding jobs, and I talked to a lot of my coworkers from my corporate career, what they realized that the jobs that they were offered were paying much less. And I'm talking probably 30 to 40% a drop in the salary. And that's significant for someone who is a particular standing, has a family, has kids, needs to pay for college and so forth. To take a job with a 30 or 40% pay cut is significant, or not to have job at all. And also with the new way of finding jobs, it became harder and harder for them to even find a job. So, with all that in mind, I know for a fact, and with the real estate turning, like you said, because we entered into that bursted bubble, it was very challenging. And this year was not any better than 2023, particularly because we were all anxiously waiting for the election. Thank God it's over and it's all behind us.
people have been using that as an excuse to not make decisions. As now that we know it's been a couple of days, I'm asking people, now do you have a crystal clear investing plan moving forward? Of course not. It was just a convenient way to postpone the decision making. And now I got to get a lay of the land. Now the holidays. I just feel like there's this kind of sense of fear that's
Yes.
showing itself as procrastination.
There is definitely an uncertainty in the House, although I feel like now with the new leadership entering the White House next year, we will gradually see some certainty, but rebuilding the country will take some time. The economy is in such a state that it will take several years until we can get it to the state where it starts growing again and we see more jobs. And as far as the investors and their sentiment goes, real estate is very cyclical. We just witnessed another rate cut today. I feel like we're going in the right direction, and gradually the demand for real estate will start going up. We'll see the lenders offering a lot more favorable terms, and gradually more investors are going to be entering the scene. And yes, holidays have always been the excuse. And I've personally experienced that when I was raising capital at the private equity firm, that the time of November and December were always completely dead. People were just preoccupied, 17 days till Christmas, 10 days till Christmas. Nothing else mattered other than the holidays. And that's totally okay. But I think come New Year, we'll see a lot more fresh capital readily available and be able to jump into deals and start executing. So I think 2025 will gradually be a lot more positive and will offer a much more favorable environment for more deals to be executed in general.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I personally have not really seen that much of a difference between raising money in the bubble and raising money in the lean years because I wasn't really very good at raising money in the bubble. I was doing it And I'm like, this is so hard, right? I walked away from deals, didn't want to put deals under contract because my attempts to raise capital that were unsuccessful or lackluster put a fear in me of, I don't know if I can do this. And so what I'm finding now is that I'm raising capital during the lean years and I'm having just the same results I've always had. So I didn't even really know that there was a problem raising capital until other operators started telling me at conferences and things like that. Oh, it's dead. It used to be so much easier. I'm like, it was? I never thought it was easier.
Not that it was easy, but and I very much appreciate your transparency. Not everyone is transparent, of course, about their past experience. So in my case, I entered into the world of private equity to the firm that existed for some time, and they had their existing investor base. That even with that, when you have existing investor base, you do need to know what you're offering investors, and you need to be an expert in your field. And I don't mean by saying an expert know everything, but you do need to be able to, first of all, answer their questions. And second of all, you ban ask you a question that you don't have an answer, be able to tell them, I will get back to you. And I cannot tell you how many times I had to say, I will get back to you until I learned, and I kept learning. I kept reading more. I kept speaking with my fund manager, who is absolutely phenomenal, very smart guy. We're still in touch to this day. We just spoke the other day. And I was and still am a continuous learner. By only learning continuously, I was able to improve. And that included, first of all, reading more about the world of private equity, about the assets that we're investing in, and third of all, personal development. All three of these things have contributed to improving my knowledge and improving my approach to raising capital. And how I know that I was successful, first of all, feedback from the clients. And second of all, the numbers. The numbers spoke for itself. I did do a lot. I don't want to disclose anything for privacy reasons, but I know that the environment itself contributed to this. So it was not only my contribution, but it was team's contribution and the whole real estate environment that was extremely favorable at the time that definitely contributed to my success at that time.
Yeah, I think one thing I've always told capital raisers, potential capital raisers, most of them are afraid of the numbers. And your finance and your accounting background probably meant that you weren't afraid of the numbers. My big thing is if it's in your pitch deck, you should be able to talk about it. It's like what you mentioned when you're giving your TEDx talk that you have to memorize those things.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're going in very prepared. You not only had the experiences, you've written the talk, and then you got to memorize the talk. And I think it's similar with that pitch deck. It's like before you go out and you start pitching to investors, if there's something about cash on cash return on page 8, like you better know what that is because you're giving this to an investor expecting a layperson to understand it. And as the capital raiser, you don't even know how to discuss what's in the pitch deck. So that's my little ranty gripe is
Yeah.
before you ever go out and say, if you want to invest in this, know your pitch deck inside and out. Basically memorize it like you did with your TEDx talk. But in your case, it wasn't the finances that were getting you. What did you have to overcome? Was it just the sales language or the conversations?
It was definitely the sales language. Coming from accounting background, I was always very dry and right to the point. We were taught in school and later at work that it's like in the military, you give the answers, but the answers are literally to the questions. You don't give more information than you asked for. And by working through that compliance, I learned to give those brief answers right to the point, not less, not more. And this was a very different world where, as you correctly said, it was a sales world. But what I did in the sales world, I more or less, without even understanding and knowing it, I took the role of a teacher, if you will. So every time I was asked the questions, I would take a scientific approach and answer it in an educational way so that the person who was in front of me was literally understanding what we were talking about because confused mind says no.
Yeah.
And that's what I was always trying to avoid. So I would start conversation by asking questions, and those questions would lead me to make a conclusion whether the potential investor was understanding what we were talking about. And it's funny you mentioned numbers. Every time I look at the numbers, I always reach for Excel. Like a lot of people use calculators. I'm purely Excel person, and it probably comes from my Big Four days when I was working at Ernst and Young as a tax accountant, because all we used at the time, macros, pivot tables, everything, it was all Excel based. So I'm probably so used to Excel that even now it's much easier for me to open an Excel or Google Sheets for that matter than going to calculator just because I'm so used to it. And everything that see, and so at that time in the DAX, I had to verify through the Excel because that's how I'm just how my mind operates essentially.
Yeah, my husband just put a retirement calculator on our website that he's, refining. It started out with a spreadsheet, and then he put the spreadsheet into ChatGPT, and he said, "Make this into a web page like it or like other." So, what you were
Like,
talking about before with the developers actually having to develop, I'm like, "Oh, yeah, no, we don't know JavaScript," but there we go. There it is on our website. So, the world is really changing, and you mentioned that the job market, a new way to find jobs. We definitely got caught up with that with the layoff, with my 20-something kids struggling to find work, but at the same time I'm struggling to keep up with the world that they are facing, and as a homeschooling mom, like, I don't have I don't have a backup team for this. So, you basically homeschooled personal finance because it wasn't being done at school. So, talk to me a little bit about that experience of the job market that you're seeing and how that's impacted investors who might be a little older, like you mentioned, like losing a job and not being able to find one because you're in your 50s and nobody wants to hire you because you have gray hair. The job finding is different now. Like, how has that impacted investors' lives and their ability to teach their kids about financial literacy?
yeah, so I actually do a little bit of career coaching on the side as well. And I noticed the changes because people are used to the old way of applying for jobs, just blindly applying, submitting their resume and cover letter. And
Sure.
what we're living it is very different, where you have to start with networking before you do anything else. And by networking, being out there, actively reaching out to people, volunteering, joining groups, joining clubs, meeting other people, and not necessarily starting a conversation, hey, I need a job. Maybe starting a conversation, I really like what you do in your club. How can I help you? How can I give value to your club so that you can see the benefits of what I'm doing? And potentially that may translate into maybe a leadership role within the club, or maybe a potential connection that the leader of the club can do for you and introduce you to a potential employer that's looking for employees. So that's in terms of the job market. In terms of the parents teaching their kids financial literacy, and I give you a ton of credit for homeschooling kids. I personally did not do it. I don't think I would have been able to do it myself, but my husband and I have always been involved in our kids' school and education. And as I was observing what my oldest, my daughter, was going through in high school, I was realizing that the lessons they were learning were not teaching them for the real world. And that's why I decided to take the matters into my own hand. And I don't mean necessarily to start teaching her what dividend kings are or what compound interest is. Although, yes, we did talk about that. But it was as simple as getting together, playing a board game. And again, it doesn't have to be Cash Flow 101 by Robert Kiyosaki. No, it could be as simple as Game of Life. Or as one of my favorite examples, and the one I used in TEDx was Rummy Cube. It's my family's favorite game. Why? Because it kills three birds at once. And number one, it's a phenomenal strategy game. And what can do better than teaching kids strategy through a game in a very relaxed environment? Number two, for our family at least, they always leave all devices outside of the game table, ideally. And I try to enforce it as much as possible. Yes, not always, but a lot of times it is enforced. And number three, while you're playing a game, guess what? When you don't have a device to look at, you're concentrated on the game. And at the same time, you can have a casual, relaxed conversation with your kids, and you can bring up subjects that are easier to discuss. Maybe it's a serious subject. Hey, what kind of job are you going to look, or what kind of schools do you want to apply, or what do you think you want to do when you grow up? And stuff that teenage kids, as you and I know very well, do not really want to discuss with their parents. If you or I were sit down with a kid at the table, say, "Hey, okay, tell me what kind of school do you want to go to?" They would say, "Come on, mom, leave me alone. I don't want to talk." But when it's relaxed, when it's casual, while you're playing the game, it's like half played, half serious.
Yeah.
And they're a lot more open to having that discussion. And I found it extremely beneficial for our families. And the conversations were not only about jobs and colleges, but the conversations went into politics. The conversations went into stories that my husband and I were able to share. Hey, this is the mistake that I made when I was your age, or I lost money here, or what I did, or I found that interview. And by sharing this, you're indirectly feeding your kids with the experiences from your life, which hopefully at least 30 to 50% of which will accumulate and not repeat. I don't expect them to accumulate all of it, but if they take even 30% of everything you share and know that that's the mistake they should not repeat, you've done a great job.
Yeah.
Estimation in my mind.
Yeah, it reminds me, there's NPR story. I've mentioned it a couple of times. I remember exactly where I was when I was listening to it on the radio, but I cannot remember the date and I cannot find the show. So if anybody's out there and you've heard this, it was an NPR story on what makes the most successful, like, happy adults and filling out their satisfaction surveys and things like that. And they started trying to find similarities between the people who had the most life satisfaction and happiness. And what came out on top was knowing their family history. And so those things that you just mentioned, just sharing, like when I tanked an interview or when I flunked a class or the happiest moment I've ever had when I felt successful, like all of that stuff, just hearing the stories from you and from maybe the grandparents or aunts and uncles in those moments of connection really help them see I share the same genes with my mom, or my mom raised me. We're not that different, right? If she overcame this or she had this success, like it doesn't seem that far fetched that they,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And kids are a lot more interested to hearing your personal stories and stories from the past and your mistakes rather than hearing from my husband. I had a meeting with my boss, oh, I'm looking for the flex spaces and the cap rates are so condensed that I cannot find anything. They don't care about cap rates or flex spaces or medical offices that that opens for. It's outside of their world and they're not interested. And I totally get that. But those past experiences and those stories that do translate into financial mistakes and financial lessons learned will benefit the kids tremendously.
Mm. I know with my 21-year-old, she has a little bit of a graphic design, amateur graphic design background. And somebody asked me to design a pitch deck. I do all the pitch decks for my own teams, partners. He wanted to a new deal with different partners. And he said, hey, can you do our pitch deck for us? We'll pay you. And I was like, I don't want to do. But my daughter, she's all do it, but she knew nothing. She thinks she knows something about real estate, but she knew nothing about it. But suddenly sitting down and having to have me explain, we're not just going to make this look pretty. They gave us really crappy information and we need to revise the information design so that it appeals to investor psychology and
Right.
explains and teaches them in a way that they'll be able to understand it. And she's, I don't know what any of this stuff is. And so just sitting with her to do these pitch decks and helping her along that path has been so educational because now she knows and cares what a cap rate is and all of these things. So you're going to always find opportunities to educate your kids in these ways. And sometimes it's just offering to pay them to do something that you are good to, and then they can learn how to do it.
Yes, very much agreed and very much can relate to that. My son actually in his high school majors in digital media and he has helped me a lot throughout my journey with my business. And so is my husband with a lot of digital assets, whether it's cleaning up webinars or updating presentations or creating other digital assets. So I can definitely relate to your experience, Emma.
Yeah, and it opens it fosters a community in the family of helping one another and teaching one another. If you're going to listen to them teach you about digital media, they're more likely to listen to you when it's your turn to talk about something you're passionate about, which is finance, investing, and all of that. Instead of doing, oh, mom, that's all you want to talk about. Like my daughter once accused me of feedback, criticism, whatever you want to call it. She's like, I feel like every conversation we have is like a business transaction. I said, well, why? No, we ever talk about like careers and money and jobs. And I said, well, you're like 17. That's what your whole life is about right now.
Yes.
And so I had to take that feedback and be like, okay, fine. We'll talk about boyfriends and clothes and stuff sometimes too. So it definitely creates more trust when there's some give and some take there.
Yeah, I am guilty of that too, Emma. So I can properly relate to your experience. That's exactly what I was talking about to my kids. And when they mentioned that, I was like, yes, I have to shift my focus. There's personal life besides just being focused and goal oriented.
Yes. I'm like, you want to know how to buy more clothes? Wear better clothes in bed, right? So there's like, you could turn it around to anything. You could turn it around to that. So I
Yeah.
think it's successful mark of a homeschooler that you can take any situation turn it into an educational opportunity.
Love it. Absolutely amazing. Right.
Yeah. Okay, so what are you up to next, and how do people get a hold of you?
People can find me either through my website, sarahfinancial.com, or on social media. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and I'm on other channels, Facebook, Instagram. I have a YouTube channel, and now I have a book. They can find my book on Amazon as well. Thank you for sharing that as well.
Yep, Your Legacy on Main Street. If you would like a free Kindle copy of that, just send me a DM with free ebook. My LinkedIn is Emma Powell 28, and I will help you get into a drawing to be able to win that book. It's not just a way to teach your kids about this stuff, especially if you don't know about it. As a homeschool mom, I don't feel like I have to know everything to be able to teach my kids. I more just hook them up with resources and things they're interested in. And so to be a resource, not only for your kids, but just for yourself to see like how to unlock true wealth. Since we've started the networking, you mentioned that process with the job, but it's also the foundation of investing because as we're attending masterminds and going on vacations with people that we meet through our investing, I'm seeing the common threads like on the happiness, like knowing their family history, but with people who are truly wealthy, like finding those common threads of what they're doing. It's all about, like you said, being a continuous learner. It's all about learning as much as you teach. It's all about understanding the power of private markets versus public markets, the power of compound interest in investing, how to leverage things like simple interest lines and life insurance, all of these kinds of things. And they're just fascinated with this as a topic. And it allows them so much freedom to just hang out with their kids at the beach. And so having this financial hobby is going to translate to everything else. It's like money is this very important tool in our lives that gives back much more than it takes for us to learn how to make it. So a book like this, I think, is beneficial, not just to teach our kids, but a lot of us, I bet I would learn something new if I read that book because I'm certainly do not have 10 out of 10 in my own financial plan. So thank you for the blood, sweat, and tears that went into writing that for
Thank you.
not all. You probably learned a lot in the process of research. Yeah, but
Yeah, funny you mentioned that. I actually, as I was writing books, one of the chapters is on finding the sources of money to invest. And as I was writing my book, I learned of a brand new source, and it's not necessarily the source that everyone would use. But since it was a source, I decided to put it in my book. It was borrowing money against your Wall Street portfolio. There's a way to borrow against that. And it's similar concept to equity line of credit, where instead of borrowing against your house, you're borrowing against your investment portfolio. But because I learned that while I was writing my book, I went back to the chapter on sources of funding and added this additional source so that people know that this exists. Granted, I only learned about it now, even though I have two business degrees where I was supposedly learning all this stuff. No, I haven't learned all that until I was doing the research and I started actively looking into things and understanding where can the money come from, and that's how I learned it. So bottom line, schools and colleges don't teach you everything. In fact, they do not teach you how to survive. They give you a degree, but it's only that. It's a degree to help you with specific profession, but they don't teach you about the real world. That real world experience should come from the parents and should be fostered within the community where the kids are growing up.
yeah, totally agree. I need to do an episode on children's education and how it makes us better parents because as you're researching things to teach your kids about, sometimes you come across that. I know the first time I heard about borrowing on margins from stock portfolio was actually teaching a class to potential real estate investors.
Oh,
I
wow.
was the teacher, right? And one of the students raised his hand and he said, have you ever borrowed on margins from your stock portfolio? And I was like, what? So I basically, he was more experienced at the stock market than I was. And so I just asked him, I said, I don't know anything about that. If you do, speak up. And so he basically taught a little mini lesson in there on margin borrowing. And I had to add that to the booklet for the class just because I felt I don't do this and I don't know much about it, but they should be at least aware it's a thing.
Amazing. Love it. Or incredible.
Thank you so much for coming on. I like you said, networking is why we do this. And then, like I said, I don't know what year I was on your podcast. I have to go. It's on my website. I have to go look it up. But if you guys want to go back and listen to Alina's podcast, where can they find you?
Everything is on YouTube channel. So my YouTube channel is simply my name, Alina Trigub. So very easy to find. Go subscribe and you'll find many interesting interviews, especially The one with Emma Pavel was, that was probably pre-pandemic, I'm guessing, right?
It was still the best interview on the whole channel. Yeah,
They
so
were amazing. Yes,
I
very
I
much.
if you're watching this on YouTube, this is the best one on my YouTube channel as well. You have a wealth of experience from your education, your career. I have always really just enjoyed talking to you and getting to know more about what you do because I feel like that's really how we learn and how we get stuff done. So thank you so much for the show.
I
I
enjoyed as well. Thank you.
All right. I'll pop my LinkedIn on there again, EmmaPal28. If you want to get a hold of me, send me a DM through there. If you want to just book some time on my calendar, investwithemma.com. It's really easy to find. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you. Like talking on the phone and networking, probably other than podcasting, is my favorite thing to do in this industry. So don't hesitate to book a call. I love doing it, could spend all day doing it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about the passive income adventures that you want to go on. And if Alina and I can help you on that journey, definitely let us know and we will try to point you in the right direction. Thank you again.